A single number just reshaped Canada's political map. It didn't make the evening news the way a scandal would, but it hit factories, farms, and balance sheets. And it created a political problem Ottawa can't buy its way out of. Around $28 billion worth of Canadian exports remain exposed to U.S. duties. Picture the scene: handshakes on a runway. A prime minister smiling beside Nordic leaders, headlines about fighter jets, icebreakers, and industrial deals. It looks like a plan. It looks hopeful. But is it strategy or theater? To understand that question, you need the backstory. Canada has long had close ties with Sweden and Finland. In 2022, Ottawa was the first country to ratify their NATO accession, a symbolic and strategic gesture that mattered. Fast forward to today, tariffs landed. Ottawa tried to push back. It lifted retaliatory duties and shelved a proposed digital services tax. It opened talks with Stockholm and Helsinki about deeper defense and industrial links. On paper, it was an attempt to diversify leverage. In practice, it raised a promise: trade access and industrial partnerships in exchange for political cover. Here's the tension. The United States remains by far Canada's largest market. The leverage Canada once hoped to convert into a bargaining chip is smaller than it looks on glossy brochures. If your biggest customer controls access to the door, alliances, even friendly ones, don't automatically change the game. Why does this matter to you? Because trade isn't abstract. Jobs, prices, and local factories depend on clear market access. And because the way a government handles pressure shapes its credibility at home and abroad, I'll show you the receipts. Later in this episode, I'll pull up the exact reporting that shows whether Ottawa's Nordic pivot produced tangible relief, or if it was mostly optics. Stay with me. The answer isn't where most people expect. So let's step into the room where those decisions were made. Ottawa's pitch was simple. If Washington won't ease the pressure, maybe Nordic allies could offer an alternative. Ministers floated joint military projects. They talked about critical minerals. They even dangled the idea of buying Sweden's Gripen fighter jets instead of sticking exclusively with America's F-35s. On paper, that sounds bold. In reality, it raised eyebrows. Think about it. When your largest market, the U.S., accounts for nearly 3/4 of your exports, can you really bluff by shopping around? Washington knows the math. It doesn't need to panic if Canada courts other partners. That's the heart of the tension. Canada wants to look independent, but independence without leverage risks looking like desperation. Here's where the story takes a twist. The Financial Times reported that Canada's concessions on tariffs, pulling back retaliatory duties, shelving a digital tax, didn't unlock relief. No deal, no breakthrough. The duties remain. If you're keeping score, that's a painful outcome. Give something up, get nothing back. Imagine telling a friend you're leaving the house to strike out on your own, only to come back a few hours later asking for dinner. That's how critics describe Ottawa's Nordic pivot. Symbolic gestures, photo ops, and joint statements, but little to show on the economic front. And once the perception of weakness sets in, it's tough to shake. But this isn't just about optics. There's real money on the line. Fighter jet procurement, for example, is worth tens of billions of dollars over its lifetime. It shapes jobs, technology, even national security policy. Canada's review of the F-35 deal, confirmed by government statements this summer, is about more than aircraft specs. It's about whether Ottawa believes it can reduce dependence on Washington without paying too high a price. So here's the cliffhanger. Does choosing a Nordic option like the Gripen actually buy Canada leverage? Or does it trade cutting edge capability for symbolism? We'll unpack that next, with the details on Saab's unique pitch to Canada and why it's stirring debate across the defense world. Here's where the plot thickens. Saab, the Swedish defense giant, walked into Ottawa with a sales pitch that sounded less like a contract and more like a national strategy. Their Gripen fighter jet offer wasn't just about delivering planes, it was about building an entire aerospace ecosystem inside Canada. We're talking local jobs, domestic assembly, long-term tech transfer, the kind of deal that politicians love to wave in front of cameras. And here's the kicker. Saab promised something even Washington struggled to match: full technology. Sharing. That means Canada wouldn't just buy the jets. It would gain the blueprints, the know-how, and the right to adapt the platform as it sees fit. For a middle power constantly worried about being overshadowed by U.S. defense dominance, that's a tempting prize. But every shiny offer comes with a shadow. The F-35 program isn't just about planes, it's about belonging to an exclusive club. The U.S., the U.K., Italy, Australia, all locked into a system of shared parts, shared upgrades, shared missions. If Canada walks away, it risks losing access to that club. Imagine being the one ally flying a different jet while everyone else runs the same playbook. Coordination suffers, influence shrinks, and in NATO, influence is currency. So the question becomes, do you take Saab's independence package or stick with America's security blanket? On the surface, it's a choice about fighter jets. Underneath, it's a test of Canada's identity. Does it want to be a loyal partner or a country carving out its own space, even if it means more risk? Critics argue that Gripen's promises sound great in headlines, but less convincing in practice. Can a Nordic company really deliver the same global supply chain resilience as the F-35 program? Supporters fire back. Why be dependent forever? Isn't sovereignty worth a little uncertainty? This tug of war isn't abstract. Billions in contracts, thousands of jobs, and decades of military planning hang in the balance. And here's the tease. A single decision in Ottawa could send ripple effects across NATO, altering not just Canada's posture, but the alliance's balance itself. Now, let's pull the camera back, because this story isn't just about jets or tariffs. It's about credibility, and credibility, once cracked, is hard to glue back together. When Ottawa announced it was reviewing the F-35 purchase, insiders in Washington noticed, allies noticed, even industry noticed. And the quiet question hanging in the air was this: is Canada serious about shifting course, or is this another bargaining chip that Washington will simply brush off? Think about it. If your largest ally knows you can't walk away, every move you make looks like theater. That's the trap Ottawa is trying to escape. But escaping isn't easy. Here's the reality check. Trade numbers don't lie. The United States buys nearly 75% of Canadian exports. Tariffs hit agriculture, steel, aluminum, and even everyday products sitting on Canadian store shelves. That's not a pressure point you can wish away with press conferences in Helsinki. And so, when retaliatory moves failed to soften Washington, the perception wasn't of strength, it was of a government outmaneuvered. But here's where it gets interesting. Inside NATO, Canada has leverage of a different kind. It's geography. The Arctic, critical minerals, a northern shield that becomes more valuable as global tensions rise. That's the card Ottawa is now trying to play, reminding allies, not just the US, but all of Europe, that Canada's role isn't optional. The question is, will anyone buy it? Or will Ottawa's mixed signals, talking sovereignty, one moment, falling back into dependence the next, undermine the message? And here's the mini cliffhanger. Behind closed doors, Canada's Nordic pivot sparked a debate that's still raging. Some officials argue it's about time Canada put real weight behind diversification. Others fear that by chasing symbolic wins, Ottawa risks losing trust in Washington without gaining enough elsewhere. So which side is right? And what does this mean for the jobs, the prices, and the policies that shape everyday life? Stay with me. In the final part, we'll bring it all together and reveal the hidden cost of Canada's gamble. So here we are, the end game. After all the speeches, photo ops, and carefully staged handshakes, the question remains, what did Canada really gain? On paper, the Nordic pivot looks bold. It signals independence. It tells voters, we're not putting all our eggs in the American basket. But in practice, the tariffs remain. The US still dominates Canadian exports. And the so-called diversification deals haven't yet delivered the kind of economic relief households were waiting for. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Strategy without leverage becomes symbolism. And symbolism doesn't pay farmers. It doesn't keep factories running. It doesn't shield Canadian businesses from billions in added costs. The Financial Times summed it up bluntly. Ottawa gave ground on tariffs and digital taxes, yet Washington didn't blink. But there's another layer. Politics. Every move in foreign policy plays back at home. For the government, the Nordic turn was a way to show toughness, to project leadership, to craft a story of options. Yet stories can only go so far before reality breaks through. And reality is this. When your biggest trading partner holds the keys, even the best framed narrative can feel fragile. Still, this isn't the end of the story. Canada does hold cards that matter. Critical minerals, Arctic routes, strategic geography. The question is whether Ottawa can play them smartly. Not just to score headlines, but to shift actual outcomes. That's the test of credibility. So what's next? More negotiations, more defense contracts, more high-stakes balancing acts between dependence and independence. But beneath it all lies a choice that Canadians will eventually have to confront. Do we want to double down on the U.S. alliance, or build a harder, riskier path toward sovereignty? Because in the end, this isn't just about trade or jets. It's about what kind of country Canada wants to be when pressure mounts. And that answer, when it finally comes, could matter far beyond Ottawa. Your take. Is sovereignty worth the gamble, even if it costs more in the short run? Or should Canada stay firmly under the U.S. umbrella? Drop your thoughts below. I'll be reading everyone.